What if I told you that Japan accidentally created the world's most chaotic wildlife experiment by abandoning an island with just 50 wild boars, which multiplied into over 10,000 super pigs in complete ecological mayhem? It sounds like nature gone absolutely insane, right? Well, Japan actually let this happen. And the result, after 30 years, has created biological chaos that's rewriting everything scientists thought they knew about animal population control and rapid evolution. But here's what makes this story truly mind-blowing. What happened on this abandoned island defied every prediction about wildlife population limits and created evolutionary changes that normally take centuries. Picture this. You're approaching Oshima Island by helicopter in 2016, and what you see below looks like a scene from a wildlife apocalypse. The entire 8-square-kilometer island is literally crawling with wild boars. They cover the beaches in massive herds numbering in the hundreds. They've dug up every square meter of soil, creating a lunar landscape of craters and trenches. Ancient forests have been completely destroyed, replaced by bare earth and scattered tree stumps. But these aren't ordinary wild boars. After 30 years of isolation and unlimited reproduction, they've evolved into something unprecedented. They're larger, more aggressive, and have developed social behaviors never documented in wild boar populations anywhere else on Earth. They live in mega herds of 200-300 individuals formations that would be impossible in normal environments due to food competition and territorial disputes. The density is absolutely staggering. Scientists calculate approximately 1,250 boars per square kilometer, making Oshima Island the most densely populated large mammal habitat on the planet. For comparison, the highest recorded wild boar densities in Europe never exceed 50 animals per square kilometer. Oshima has 25 times that concentration. The island has become a living laboratory for studying what happens when a large mammal population faces absolutely no limits on reproduction, no predation pressure, and no human interference. The results have shocked wildlife biologists and forced them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about animal population dynamics. But to understand how this biological chaos began, we need to go back to 1986, when a volcanic eruption changed everything. Oshima Island sits 100 kilometers south of Tokyo in the Philippine Sea. For centuries, it had been home to small fishing communities that coexisted with a modest population of wild boars, descendants of animals introduced centuries ago for hunting. The ecosystem was stable, with perhaps 50-80 boars living in the island's forested interior, while humans occupied the coastal areas. The island's 8,000 human residents had developed a sustainable relationship with the wild boar population. Occasional hunting kept numbers stable, while the boars provided meat and were considered part of the island's natural heritage. The animals were well adapted to the volcanic landscape, using lava tube caves for shelter and feeding on the diverse plant life that thrived in the mineral-rich volcanic soil. Then, on November 15, 1986, Mount Mahara erupted with explosive violence that hadn't been seen for decades. Lava flows threatened villages, volcanic gases made the air unbreathable, and continuous earthquakes made daily life impossible. The Japanese government ordered the complete evacuation of all 8,000 residents within 48 hours. The evacuation was so urgent that residents could take only essential personal belongings. Livestock, pets, and of course, wild animals were left behind. Officials assumed the eruption would last a few weeks at most, after which residents could return and resume normal life. But the volcanic activity continued for months. What was supposed to be a temporary evacuation became a permanent abandonment. By 1987, it was clear that Oshima Island would remain uninhabitable for years, possibly decades. The human community that had existed for centuries was gone forever. Left behind in this abandoned landscape were approximately 50 wild boars. These animals suddenly found themselves in a situation unprecedented in mammalian evolutionary history. An entire island ecosystem with unlimited food resources, no predators, no human hunting pressure, and no natural population controls. Wildlife experts at the time predicted that the small boar population would either die out due to genetic bottlenecking and inability to maintain viable breeding groups, or would stabilize at sustainable levels based on the island's carrying capacity. No one anticipated what actually happened. The first scientific surveys conducted in 1990 found something unexpected. Instead of dying out or remaining stable, the wild boar population was exploding. Researchers counted over 200 individuals, a four-fold increase in just 4 years. But this was only the beginning. Female wild boars normally produce 14 or 6 piglets per year under optimal conditions. On Oshima, with unlimited food and no predation pressure, females were producing litters of 8 and 12 piglets and breeding twice annually instead of once. Juvenile survival rates approached 90% compared to the 30 to 40% typical in wild populations facing normal environmental pressures. The mathematical progression was staggering. Each breeding pair was producing 15-20 surviving offspring annually instead of the normal 2 to 3. With exponential reproduction and minimal mortality, the population doubled every 18 months. By 1995, researchers estimated over 1,000 boars on the island, but the population explosion was creating problems that no wildlife biologist had ever observed. The boars were consuming vegetation faster than it could regenerate. Ancient forests that had covered the island for centuries were being systematically destroyed as massive herds of boars uprooted every plant seeking food. The animals were also displaying behaviors never documented in wild boar populations. Traditional territorial boundaries disappeared as overcrowding forced animals into unnaturally close proximity. Boars that would normally live in family groups of 5 to 10 individuals were forming megaherds numbering in the hundreds. Most remarkably, the normal social hierarchy of wild boar populations completely broke down. In typical environments, dominant males controlled territories and breeding access. On Oshima, the overwhelming abundance of food and mates eliminated the evolutionary pressure for territorial behavior. Males and females of all ages mingled freely in massive groups. By 2000, Oshima Island had become something unprecedented in wildlife biology, a mammalian population experiencing unchecked exponential growth in a closed system. The results were transforming not just the animal population, but the entire ecosystem in ways that defied scientific understanding. The boar population had reached an estimated 3,000 individuals, and their impact on the landscape was catastrophic. Satellite imagery showed that over 60% of the island's forest cover had been destroyed. Areas that had been dense woodland in 1986 were now bare earth pockmarked with wallows and foraging craters. The animals had eaten virtually every plant on the island, except for the most toxic species. Rare endemic plants that had evolved over millennia in isolation were driven to extinction in just over a decade. The boars had consumed seeds, roots, bulbs, bark, and any organic matter they could access. But rather than facing starvation as population biologists predicted, the boars adapted their behavior in unprecedented ways. They began consuming materials never recorded in wild boar diets: seaweed, marine invertebrates, and even carrion from their own species. Groups of boars were observed coordinating beach foraging, behavior completely unknown in mainland populations. The animals were also changing physically. With unlimited food during their developmental years, the island boars were growing significantly larger than their mainland counterparts. Adult males averaged 30% heavier than normal wild boars, while females showed increased fertility and extended breeding seasons. Most remarkably, the social structure was evolving in real time. The massive herds that had formed during the population explosion began organizing into complex hierarchies never observed in wild boar populations. Researchers documented coordinated group behaviors, including synchronized foraging, collective territory defense, and sophisticated communication systems. The mega herds developed leadership structures where experienced females guided group movements and foraging decisions. These matriarch leaders showed decision-making behaviors typically associated with elephant or whale societies, rather than wild boars. the animals were essentially reinventing social organization in response to their unique environmental circumstances. Breeding behavior also evolved rapidly. With no territorial males controlling access to females, the island developed a mating system based on female choice rather than male dominance. Females began selecting mates based on different criteria than typical wild boar populations, leading to genetic changes that were becoming visible within just a few generations. The genetic isolation was creating evolutionary pressure that would normally take millennia to manifest. Island boars were developing distinctive physical characteristics: larger body size, different coat coloration, and modified facial features. Some individuals showed traits never documented in wild boar populations anywhere in the world. By 2005, the population reached an estimated 5,000 individuals. The ecosystem had achieved a new equilibrium, but one based on complete environmental degradation rather than sustainable balance. The island had essentially become a desert populated by super pigs that had adapted to survive in conditions they had created. The animals were now living at population densities that should have been biologically impossible. Food scarcity had forced them to become omnivorous scavengers rather than the selective foragers they had been originally. They consumed anything organic: insects, worms, marine organisms, and plant matter that would be considered inedible by normal wild boar standards. Most remarkably, the population showed no signs of crashing despite consuming resources far beyond the island's apparent carrying capacity. The boars had become so efficient at extracting nutrition from degraded environments that they were sustaining population levels that defied ecological predictions. The island's ecosystem had been transformed into something unprecedented, a biological experiment in what happens when a large mammal population faces no natural controls. The results were challenging fundamental assumptions about population dynamics, ecological carrying capacity, and evolutionary adaptation timescales. International wildlife biologists began studying Oshima Island as a natural laboratory for understanding population dynamics without human intervention. The insights were relevant for conservation biology, ecosystem management, and understanding how species might adapt to rapidly changing environments. But the most dramatic discoveries were yet to come. As the population continued growing through the 2000s, the boars began displaying behaviors that rewrote scientific understanding of wild boar intelligence and social organization. Researchers documented tool use among the island boars, behavior never observed in wild populations. Groups were observed using rocks and sticks to access food sources, coordinating their efforts in ways that suggested planning and communication far beyond typical wild boar capabilities. The animals developed complex territorial arrangements where different megaherds controlled specific areas of the island according to sophisticated agreements. Conflicts between groups were resolved through ritualized displays rather than physical confrontation, preventing the massive casualties that would be expected from territorial disputes among thousands of large, aggressive mammals. Most surprisingly, the boars began modifying their environment in ways that resembled primitive agriculture. They created wallows in strategic locations that collected rainwater during dry periods. They cleared areas around favored food plants in ways that appeared to promote growth. Some groups even appeared to be practicing rudimentary seed dispersal and cultivation. By 2010, the Oshima Island boar population had stabilized at approximately 8,000 individuals. The ecosystem had reached a new equilibrium based on complete environmental transformation and unprecedented animal adaptation. The island had become a living example of how quickly mammalian populations could evolve when freed from normal environmental constraints. The most recent scientific surveys, conducted between 2015 and 2020, revealed that Oshima Island had become something that challenged the fundamental concepts of wildlife biology. The boar population had reached over 10,000 individuals, a 200-fold increase from the original 50 animals left behind in 1986. But the real discoveries came from detailed behavioral and genetic studies that documented evolutionary changes happening in real time. The island boars had become a distinct subspecies in just 30 years, a process that typically takes thousands of years in normal environments. DNA analysis revealed genetic adaptations that improved the animal's ability to survive in their self-created, degraded environment. They had evolved enhanced digestive systems that could extract nutrition from poor-quality food sources. Their immune systems had strengthened to resist diseases that would normally control population size. Most remarkably, their brain structure had changed to support the complex social behaviors required for mega-herd coordination. The cognitive evolution was unprecedented. Island boars showed problem-solving abilities and social intelligence far beyond anything documented in mainland populations. They developed sophisticated communication systems using vocalizations, scent markers, and body language that allowed coordination among groups of hundreds of individuals. Reproductive strategies had also evolved uniquely. Instead of the normal pattern of single annual breeding seasons, island boars maintained continuous reproduction year-round. Females had adapted to give birth and nurse multiple litters simultaneously, maximizing reproductive output in the resource-abundant environment. The animals had essentially become living proof of how quickly evolution could operate under extreme environmental pressure. The genetic isolation and unlimited resources had created evolutionary conditions that accelerated adaptation beyond anything previously documented in large mammals. Perhaps most remarkably, the boars had developed what researchers described as cultural transmission. Learned behaviors passed between generations that were genetically determined. Young boars learned specialized foraging techniques, social protocols, and environmental management practices from their elders, creating a primitive but recognizable culture. The island ecosystem itself had stabilized in an entirely artificial state. The boars had created and now maintained a landscape that supported their massive population through environmental management behaviors. They maintained water sources, managed vegetation growth in specific areas, and even appeared to practice population self-regulation through complex social mechanisms. Scientific research on Oshima Island was providing insights relevant to conservation biology worldwide. The rapid evolutionary changes documented in the boar population offered clues about how species might adapt to rapidly changing environments caused by climate change or human activity. The study of megaherd social organization was informing research on animal intelligence and social evolution. Behaviors observed in the island boars were helping scientists understand how complex societies might emerge and evolve in mammalian species. The population dynamics research was relevant for understanding how species might respond to removal of natural predators or environmental constraints. The Oshima boars demonstrated that mammals could adapt to extreme population densities if given sufficient time and resources. But the island also served as a warning about the consequences of removing natural ecological controls. The environmental destruction caused by the unchecked boar population illustrated what could happen when mammalian populations faced no limits on growth or behavior. International scientific collaborations emerged around Oshima Island research. Universities from around the world sent researchers to study the unique evolutionary laboratory that had emerged from the 1986 volcanic evacuation. The insights were being applied to conservation projects, ecosystem management, and understanding of evolutionary processes. The boars themselves had become subjects of intensive study using non-invasive research techniques. Researchers used remote cameras, GPS tracking, genetic sampling, and behavioral observation to understand how the population had adapted to their unique circumstances. Most recently, scientists have begun studying whether the evolutionary changes in the Oshima boars could be reversed if normal environmental pressures were restored. The question has implications for conservation biology and understanding the permanence of rapid evolutionary adaptation. The island has also become relevant for astrobiology and understanding how life might evolve in isolated environments. The rapid adaptation and environmental modification shown by the boars offers insights into how organisms might establish themselves in new or changing environments. Today, Oshima Island stands as one of the most important natural experiments in modern biology. The accidental creation of a mammalian population freed from normal evolutionary constraints has provided insights into population dynamics, evolutionary adaptation, and ecosystem management that couldn't be obtained through traditional research methods. The 10,000 plus wild boars that now inhabit the island represent a unique evolutionary story, from a small stable population to an explosion of super pigs that redefined what scientists thought was possible in mammalian adaptation. Their story continues to unfold as researchers document ongoing changes in population structure, behavior, and ecosystem interaction. The abandoned island that was supposed to host a temporary evacuation became a decades-long experiment in evolution without limits. The results have challenged scientific assumptions, provided unique research insights, and demonstrated nature's incredible capacity for adaptation when freed from normal constraints. The chaos on Oshima Island proves that when mammals face no limits, evolution doesn't follow the rules. It rewrites them entirely. The super pigs that emerged from 50 abandoned boars have become living laboratories for understanding life's incredible adaptive potential. From volcanic evacuation to evolutionary revolution, from 50 boars to 10,000 super pigs, from stable ecosystem to biological chaos, Oshima Island demonstrates that nature, when freed from all constraints, can create wonders and horrors beyond scientific prediction. What other isolated populations do you think might be undergoing similar rapid evolutionary changes that we haven't discovered yet?